You know, back in the 19th century, a real battle was raging over the Dutch East Indies. Who was really in charge? Was it the personal property of the king, who could rule it however he wanted? Or was it governed by Parliament, representing the Dutch people? This wasn't just some legal squabble. This was a 30-year constitutional war that would shape the future of the Netherlands and its most valuable colony.
So, this whole conflict, it all came down to one single, powerful legal phrase, opperbestuur by uitsluiting. Now, in the early 1800s, everybody thought they knew exactly what this meant. The king had exclusive, supreme rule. He, and only he, had absolute power over the colonies. Simple as that. No ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Okay, so to really get this, we've got to rewind a bit, right to the end of the Napoleonic Wars. The Kingdom of the Netherlands is brand new, it's just gotten its colonies back, and the big question on everyone's mind is, how are we going to govern this enormous, faraway territory? Well, the first answer was pretty straightforward. Just let the king handle it.
And this right here, this is the sentence that kicked the whole thing off. Article 60 of the 1815 Constitution. It says, the king has, by exclusion, the supreme governance over the colonies. Now, if you are a monarchist, that was it. Case closed. That phrase, by exclusion, meant everyone else, and they were definitely looking at Parliament, was completely shut out of the process.
But pretty soon, a war over words just exploded. What did supreme governance, or opperbestuur, actually mean? Did it cover literally everything, including the power to write laws, or was it a bit more limited than that? And let me tell you, this wasn't just some dusty academic debate. This was a fight for control over the lives and fortunes of millions.
So it all boiled down to this one huge question. When it came to creating the actual laws for the millions of people living in the East Indies, who had the final say? Was it the king, all by himself, ruling with a royal decree? Or was that ultimate power shared between the king and the Dutch Parliament, working together?
And this split created two opposing camps. On one side, you had the royalists. They argued that supreme governance meant total, absolute power. Legislative, executive, you name it, the king had it. But on the other side were the parliamentarians, championed by brilliant thinkers like Van Hogendorf and, of course, the great statesman Thorbecke. Their argument was for a clear separation of powers. Sure, let the king handle the day-to-day running of things, but the big, fundamental laws, that had to be the job of Parliament.
And you can really hear the passion in the parliamentary argument right here, in this quote from Thorbecke. He asked this amazing rhetorical question. Basically, do the people in the colonies deserve the stability that comes from real laws any less than we do here at home? His point was powerful and clear. The Indies deserved proper laws made by a legislature, not just the easily changed whims of a king.
But the government, well, they pushed back, hard. J.C. Bouvelaard, who was a very powerful minister of colonies, essentially argued that you just can't run a huge, distant empire by committee. He insisted that what you really needed was a sensible application of the autocratic principle. For him, autocracy wasn't some evil tyranny, it was just a practical tool you needed for effective and, let's be honest, profitable rule.
So, while all these brilliant legal minds were debating the theory, what was actually happening on the ground? Well, in reality, there was no debate at all. The king's autocratic interpretation was the only one that mattered. He was ruling the Indies by decree, period.
And this timeline, wow, it really shows the king just flexing his constitutional muscle. Again and again, he issued these regeringsreglementen, or government regulations. Think of them as mini constitutions for the Dutch East Indies. And every single one of them was created by the king alone, without any input from Parliament. This kind of unchecked power had massive consequences, allowing for things like the hugely exploitative cultivation system in 1830 to be rolled out by royal command alone.
So what even were these regulations? Well, a lot of people at the time, and even scholars later on, saw them as nothing more than instructions for the governor-general. They weren't meant to be permanent, bedrock laws. They were more like flexible guidebooks that the king could edit or completely rewrite whenever he wanted.
The historian Robert Van Niel just nailed it with this summary. He said that governance in the Indies during this era rested on a system of men rather than laws. What that means is the personal will of the king and the officials he appointed mattered way more than any fixed legal code. It was all about who was in charge, not what the law said.
But, a system like this, it can't last forever. For decades, you had the intellectual pressure from guys like Thorbecke, and that, combined with growing political and financial worries, all of it slowly started to chip away at the king's absolute power. The calls for some kind of accountability just got too loud to ignore.
And that brings us to the year that changed everything,
1848. A massive wave of revolution was sweeping across Europe, and the Netherlands wasn't going to be left out. This was the moment the old system was finally going to break.
The constitutional reform of 1848 wasn't just a tweak, it was a total game-changer. The king's exclusive Opperbesteurer was finally broken. From that moment on, Parliament would have a say in making laws for the colonies. And maybe most importantly, government ministers were now accountable to Parliament, not just to the king. The age of royal autocracy over the colonies was officially over.
So, the constitutional battle was settled back in 1848, but the story doesn't really end there, does it? It leaves us with this really big question. When a country is run for decades by a system of men rather than laws, what kind of legacy does that leave behind? How does that history of centralized, autocratic rule continue to influence the politics and institutions of post-colonial nations even today?